Welcome to PhD with Women on IT, Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest, Kylee Stone. Topic: Embracing Indigenous Wisdom to Become the Most Authentic Leader of Our Time. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my mojo. And empathy is critical when you are embracing Indigenous wisdom to become the most authentic leader of our time. I wanted to say thank you very much, Kylee, for staying with us. It's a recording. We are not going live, unfortunately, because the curvature of the earth does not allow us. Kylee is joining us from far, far away, and it's 10 p.m. It's almost 10 p.m. In the evening. And it's 6 p.m. in my time zone in Turks and Caicos Islands. So as leaders, we need to focus on bringing something positive, and this recording purpose is to bring you some knowledge. As leaders, let's rethink how we approach leadership in the modern era and embrace Indigenous wisdom to become authentic. Let's use technology as an enabler of collaboration and connection rather than competition. Our PhD guest, Kylee, is a descendant of Wakka and Kulluli First Nations people with 20 years in the business of storytelling and a deep passion for embracing Indigenous wisdom to connect people with purpose. Kylee is a brand builder, leadership coach, and presenter of the Emerging Leaders program. Kylee, where in the world are you?
So I am in Sydney, Australia, so capital city here over in the Southern Hemisphere.
Excellent. And so I am going to ask you about the community you're talking about, Wakka and Kulluli First Nations people.
Yes. So I'm a descendant of the stolen generations of Aboriginal culture here in Australia, two tribes in particular. So my grandmother was born in what's called the Wakka region, which is an area in the southeast area of Queensland here in Australia. And her mother, so my great-grandmother, was originally from Kulluli. Because of my stolen generation heritage, when the Westerners came to Australia and they relocated Aboriginal people away from their hometown and their families, they were relocated to different areas. So for me to acknowledge the traditional owners, I acknowledge both the Wakka, where my grandmother was born, but also where her mother had been taken from originally, which is where her originating family are from, which is called the Kulluli people.
Beautiful. And obviously, leadership is very important if you want to build communities. How did you learn about their background, heritage?
Growing up when I was a teenager more than anything, because being part of the stolen generation, it was something that was not talked about a lot. And so I knew that I was Indigenous, but it wasn't front and center in my life. As a teenager, my mother would talk often about being Aboriginal, but didn't know a lot about it. And honestly, it wasn't until when I went to college, I had to fill out forms to apply to go to university. And at the time, it asked you to identify whether you were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And of course, I always would tick the box, yes, I am. And that was as far as it went. I think it wasn't really until the movement here probably about 10 years ago, when more and more people were starting to identify and start to talk about our heritage, and certainly it became a lot more, well known, that I went back to with my mother, actually, because we had been trying for many, many years to connect with our family, and it was very difficult because we didn't have the paperwork. So it was hard to find where our family were connected and to connect with them. It took my mother 4 years before she actually got contacted by an organization that took to try to connect you. And that happened in 2017. And so that was really when my journey, I suppose, started more. Again, I started to learn a lot more. My mother had been doing a lot of research for years. Suddenly it was now something that I was starting to learn a lot more about.
What was the big aha moment when you looked at the background, at your past, and how did it help you shape the woman you are today?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've spent, it was probably 20 years of my career in the media industry, and I started in research and marketing and communications. And it was when I had many years later, and I was in a leadership position actually, and I had 3 children. I was making some decisions about how I try to juggle both having children and my career, and which was not easy considering other women at work, mostly because I was looking for how can I do this for myself. By that stage, I'd been coaching also for about a period of 10 years. I effectively managed that stage of my life. But there was a lot of women at work who were struggling. Just out of coffee chats with women at work, people would ask me, well, what are you doing and how are you making it work? And organically, what happened is I ended up starting running a mentoring group for women, and we would get together on a weekly basis. And at the time, there was no video conferencing, so we just used to get together either in a room and people would dial in on a conference call, and actually really went crazy. In fact, we had started with 6 people. In the end of 6 to 8 weeks, we had, 60 people in this group, and we ran some events and we ran some storytelling. And I was sitting there after a very successful event. We had over 150, I think, show up to the first one, and we had a bunch of women telling their personal stories and how they were navigating some of the challenges. And it was when one of the ladies had said to me, oh, it's really good that you've decided to design this based on your Aboriginal culture, the storytelling. And I said, what do you mean? And I said, I hadn't actually thought about it. It wasn't until somebody said to me that, brought that up, and I started to look at what was happening in my life and what I was doing. And a lot of what I was doing was actually all embracing everything that my culture and my background as an Aboriginal person was like it was in my blood. I'd never call it being a storyteller when I first got into my career, but now we do talk a lot about people who work in the business of telling stories as storytellers. So it was a bit of a shock surprise that I was like, wow, well, it just was quite natural.
And the wisdom is brought to everybody, to community members, via stories that are going to inspire, teach basic rules of good human behavior. So I wonder, how did it impact your style in leadership?
I think the most important thing out of all of it is very simple, and that is the ability to listen. We go back in time for Aboriginal people, and certainly in our culture, stories were something that you told when you were sitting around a campfire, for example. When you were listening to someone share their stories, there were no distractions. In fact, your attention as somebody who was listening to the story was only to listen to the story. It was not to be distracted by anything else. The value of hearing people share their stories made a profound difference in the experiences, people's relationship with each other, in their connection and their understanding, their appreciation. And it's part of what's actually had the culture live for so many thousands of years, because people were able to pass down that knowledge and that wisdom. So if we apply that to today, to leadership in particular, I think the importance is that we often misinterpret storytelling, that the value lies in what's being said. And of course, the value does lie in what's being spoken, but the real important part is how well we listen when somebody else is telling their stories. And in today's modern day world, you find that it's very difficult to listen without distractions, because there is so much going on, and the fast pace of our life can often make it difficult to sit there and pay attention and listen to what somebody has from a place that really understands the message from the way in which it's being communicated. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think one of the most valuable things that I've learned is actually at the same time being able to apply modern day science, because if we use practices like mindfulness and to slow the pace down, and we remove all the distractions in the way in which we live our life, then we're more likely to get value from the stories that are being told, such that we're able to embrace the wisdom that's being shared, and we're doing that without distraction.
I'm thinking about the tribal, the saying that we are talking about, it takes a tribe to raise a child. So what does it take to raise a leader?
I would say the same thing. I think one of the myths that we do need to confront in leadership is that leadership is about the person who's leading. But in fact, a leader is only effective when they have, another way of saying it, followers. So in fact, the very simple definition of a leader is somebody who leads from the front but has followers. So in fact, listening in that respect is, it really is the community that empowers somebody who's in leadership to listen to what they have to say in a way that really forwards the commitment. The only purpose ultimately for leadership is to be able to move people towards a particular outcome. So it is all about community.
All about community, and as Eleanor Roosevelt once said, to handle yourself, you need to use your head. But to handle people, you need to use your heart. How does your heart comes into the AI and digital age, when you say there are lots of disruption? How can we enhance that heart by bringing technology into the mix?
If anything, we do need to look at practices like, and I'll use mindfulness as a perfect example, being able to implement practices that allow us to stop and slow down the pace that we live so that we're able to think clearly, listen clearly, because it's when we stop. In fact, I remember there was a really beautiful quote by Rumi that says, "The morning breeze has secrets to tell you, don't go back to sleep." And the point of the quote is that we are usually connected to our heart and what is our true self, often between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. And that's because we've had time for the body to be at rest and at peace, and the mind has had time to slow down. And so I think if we're going to take that principle into the workplace, for example, or in life, we know that if you're able to implement practices that allow you to quieten the mind, to bring stillness, to allow you to empty your thoughts, for example, then that it's those moments you're able to reconnect with what's true to you in your heart, rather than just constantly speaking from what's coming in your head, for example.
But how can we do that when we are living in that, harsh environment of the office, and we have to commute, and we are surrounded by the noise? Do we put a headset and listen to some music, or what is the best practice, or what is your practice, Kylee?
Yeah, look, I would say it's a journey, Beata. And, depending on where you are, I remember when I first started, I used to be somebody who would say, I just can't do it. I don't have the patience for it, because I was always so busy. And then, as you can imagine, with the children, it was like there was never enough time, is my opinion, So I found it really, really difficult. And so when I look at actually what happened when I first started, I remember it was actually during a time when my stress levels were so high that I was in burnout and exhaustion, and I ended up spending 4 days in bed wiped out. And I actually had a coach at the time, and the coach said to me, "Kylee, you need to stop trying to think like you've got to get it all done right now, and just slow things down and do one small thing." He said, "It doesn't even need to be a big thing. Just what is the smallest action you can take?" And so I took that lesson and applied it to a lot of things, in particular, this ability to be able to implement a practice that does help the brain slow things down, even if you are running at 100 miles an hour. And that takes a bit of practice. So my first step was I would spend 1 minute in the morning as the first thing I did when I woke up, and I would turn on an app that I had, because I was shocking at trying to meditate without any guidance. So I got help, and I downloaded this app that guided me in a 1 minute breathing practice to teach me how to breathe and to teach me how to listen to somebody else's guidance for 1 minute. And I tell you, it really was that I did that day in and day out for a week. And only when I finished the week did I then add another minute. And then I went to 2 minutes, and I'm now up to 10 minutes. So, what it does is it gives you the space to breathe in between thinking and speaking. So then when I'm in my day-to-day life, the pace in which I live my life is much slower. And if the world seems to be moving too quick for me and someone's talking too quick for me, I actually now have a practice of actually stopping and going, I'm sorry, but can you please say that again? Because I'm actually not catching up with what you're saying. So that would be my place to start.
So slowing down, focusing on the practice of breathing. However, I have to say that it's quite difficult when you have somebody next to you. So, for example, we try to do the breathing and meditation with my daughter and her friend, and it took a lot of patience and kind of tuning into my body rather than hearing their breathing, their knocking under the table, and their impatience. So definitely that is something that can knock you out of your meditation process. Also finding the right meditator tone of voice, because I think it's really hard to focus when you don't like the sound of the voice or when you don't like the meditation you try. So you have to try different methods, try different coaches. And just like in life, you do a lot of things you don't like doing before you discover what you like doing.
Yeah.
You've got children. I wonder what their ages are and how do children impact your leadership style?
So I have 3 children. My eldest one now is 16. Who's a boy, and then my daughter is 15, and then my youngest son is 13. Yeah, it was a turning point for me. Based on their ages, within the space of 3 years, I had 3 children. So I had just stepped into a senior leadership position at the time. And within 12 months, I'd fallen pregnant and had the first one. And after 3 months, he was a great sleeper. And so within 3 months, I was really keen to get back into work because I was bored. And I had a great return. In fact, my experience of maternity leave and returning to work with children was extraordinary. I had a great supportive boss. And so that journey in particular was pretty straightforward. But then once I'd had the third one, that was when everything started to fall apart for me. I remember having the thought, I don't think I can, look, I just can't keep doing this with 3 kids. It's too much. It's going to be too much of my kids. It's not fair on them. And then I started to think about what the future would look like if I had to look back and regret the decision I made. And I thought, I just do not want to put all of my priority on my work and then regret not having had quality time with my kids. So at that point, I, negotiated a part-time role so that I could balance both having the children and the position. But unfortunately, this was where things got tricky for me, that in a senior leadership position, they only allowed you to stay in that position if you were full-time. And I was unwilling to do full-time. So it meant that I had to step back from my accountability on the senior leadership team. I still had the executive kind of level, but I no longer had a team. I was no longer in the executive decision-making, budget meetings and strategy planning sessions. And I think I maybe lasted 2 months before I was very annoyed and very angry and upset and bitter about the whole thing. So it was, at the time, really challenging. But what it did for me was, I remember sitting in the board and kind of just outside the boardroom, and all the leaders from my team walked in, and I was sitting outside, and it was that key moment that changed everything, because I thought to myself, this is not okay. It's not okay that I spend 20 years to get to this point, and just because I'm not giving full time, I can't sit in on what was typically the decision-making and part of that team. I really invested in myself. I looked at what can I do to have the impact that I want to have as a leader without the constraints of not having to work full-time. And look, that's been my mission ever since.
I'm going to ask you an additional question, okay? So does it mean that you had to start your own career, or were you still keeping the job just to pursue your career and have the freedom of financial stability? How was it at that time?
Yeah, so I was doing 3 days a week in the job that I had, and then I had the 2 days at home with the kids. And then over time, I increased the amount of hours. All the meanwhile, trying to work out how much longer can I go on this, because I was really not fulfilled. And on that last day, so I was doing then 4 days in the job, and that extra day was the day that I was mentoring women, and we were having these weekly workshops with having conversations about what we can do to have an impact outside of this traditional path. And so we ended up organising an event, and we brought a bunch of women together who collectively we had 5 different women get up on stage sharing their stories about what they were doing to help them navigate this journey and the way that they could accomplish success, you know, in ways in different areas of their life. And it was at the end of that event that somebody had said to me, you know, Kylee, when are you going to leave here and start to do something that really matches your potential? And that was the moment I went, okay, what's next for me? How much longer am I going to stay? And look, to be honest, a lot of the reason why I stayed also was, you know, the financial stability. I was concerned about leaving and not then having the income that I needed. And then I started doing a whole lot of thinking about what I would do next. And I thought, well, what's natural for me, given the work that I was doing with women, was to start coaching other women and run workshops and really support how to help women succeed and take that step to have the impact without thinking that they have to jump into a leadership position. So I had a conversation with the guy, with my manager at the time, and I was accountable at the time for a restructure in the company. So I knew that long term, this role in particular was going to be something that I could potentially, you know, opt out of. So I had a conversation with him and said, look, I think that you might be better off giving me a redundancy because long term, this is not a viable option to be paying me a senior level position when technically you could bring somebody in part time and they could do this change management role separately. Anyway, that paid dividends. It came quicker than I was hoping for. So we had this conversation going into the Christmas 2014. And when we came back in the new year and we sat down and had a cup of coffee, says, well, he said, I've got the redundancy for you if you want it. I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for it really. But I thought, well, here's my chance. You know, I can take it now and use this as an opportunity to do the, you know, the planning and start building what it was I was going to do next. And that's exactly what I did. So I took the redundancy and then I started invested in a business development program, got certification as a coach, and that's how I made that change.
And the rest is a history.
That's right.
Exactly. The story you can tell everybody else. Well, you started with your certification. You were going very strong with your community building and coaching programs. I was wondering, how did it impact your home life? I mean, leading your children, and now I guess the progress would be it's the teenage age that is so difficult, so challenging, because your leadership style is going to be questioned a lot of times.
Look, there was a couple of things I think that are a standout for me. Firstly, I would say when the children were younger and they were in daycare where I could drop them off for the whole day, it was a lot easier to work the longer hours and make that commitment. The only challenge, of course, was then when you get home, you had another job. Yeah. So you just didn't stop. You know, you'd come home and then it was chaos because you got 3 kids, then you got to prepare the dinner, then you got to get them to bed. So by the time I was getting to bed, I was pretty exhausted. So the thing that unfortunately, about 12 months after I'd left, I ended up getting quite sick. I'd hit burnout. I underestimated how hard it was actually going to be, because at least when I went to the office, I know this sounds crazy, right? But at least when I went to the office, it was almost like having a break from being at home with the children. But that when I came home, being in the house actually came with additional complications. So it didn't slow things down. It actually increased the amount of stress that I had. But the other thing I underestimated going out of that corporate life was that suddenly when you're running your own business, you don't have a human resources team, you don't have a sales team, you don't have a marketing team, you don't have a finance team, you do everything. So suddenly the amount of time that I had to manage doing the work of coaching was cut short because I now had to do a whole lot more. About, yeah, like I said, it was about 12 months in. I found myself really exhausted. I couldn't work out why I felt really upset. I had done a trip to Perth, and I was facilitating a program, and literally on the flight on the way back I was watching this really romantic rom-com and found myself in a bunch of like just tears. I could not stop crying, and I couldn't work out why. And when I got home, I was just upset. I couldn't understand why I was upset. Yeah, I was literally in bed for about 4 days. And it was during that time I went from being really a whole lot of anxiety, to being very depressed, and being somebody who was very smart and someone who was done a lot of work in this area of coaching. I could not make sense of why I felt the way that I did, because I had everything I could ask for. I mean, I 3 incredible children, a great job, I was having a big impact. But what happened was, after about 2 months of going to various doctors, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And sadly, what was happening in my body was that the body was attacking itself, and it didn't really matter what I was doing. It just started to, impact my cortisol levels, the adrenaline, and the symptoms of all of that were things like depression and anxiety. So that had a massive impact. But, I started prioritizing my health as the number one thing. Started to cut back a lot. I really had to take a break for about 12 months until I got myself back on track. And during that time, I wasn't then at home with the kids full time. And then I've just really slowly rebuilt from there. I learned a lot of valuable lessons about what worked and didn't work. And, as a mother, I think one of the biggest lessons for me was that I was attempting to do it all, attempting to run a job and then also do everything at home. And, not that I liked to call myself this, but at the end of the day, I was probably doing what would say one is a bit of a martyr, trying to do it all. And now that I look back and I go, it's not wise. It's just not wise to think that you're going to be able to do it all, because it causes burnout. So, I think that now where I'm at, though, is now that the kids are a lot older, it has a whole lot of different challenges. It certainly does. But, in saying that, I think my kids now are at a point where they're incredibly independent, and it's now time for me to balance what that looks like with being able to now just slowly re-enter and do more. And I think I just, if anything, and this is a big lesson I think that we've all got to go through at some point, is that to not feel like we have to live our life according to what we have defined as social norms. We've got this construct around 5 days and working full time and how that needs to look and how much money we need to look. And I think sometimes we just need to challenge that.
Well, I think it's time to quote the previous Pepsi co Indra Nooyi, who said she's been in Pepsi CEO for a couple of years. She recently finished her career, but she said, if you ask our daughters, she said in a frank interview, on my work-life balance, I'm not sure they will say that I've been a good mom. We cannot fool ourselves. We can't have everything perfect. Sometimes the cake we baked for the school venue is not going to be perfect. Sometimes the outfit is going to be stained, and they're going to go in a stained outfit, because after all, what matters is a happy child and happy mother. And if it is frustrating, you are better off focusing on one thing rather than trying to keep it all to perfect level. The burnout factor is very important, and I'm wondering, is there a lesson from your Aboriginal roots how to deal with burnout, how to kind of go out of the tribe, or is there some story you could bring to us that would inspire us?
Yeah, I do think not trying to do it all yourself, certainly surround yourself with people who can contribute, and that makes the biggest difference. First, I started outsourcing a lot rather than trying to do it. But then, I really had to deal with making sure that I got my kids involved, and that it was not something that it was just because I'm the mother, it just doesn't become my job to always do the cooking or always do the cleaning, that we can all do that together. But it's surprisingly, that was a very difficult lesson for me. Growing up, my mum, you know, did work full time, and what I hadn't realized is my decisions as a mother were being shaped by the things that I didn't have when I was a child, and I wanted to make sure that I was around, and so I was compensating as a mother by trying to do it all. So the lesson for me of not doing that was very difficult, and it did take me some time. But the other part that you know, in the Aboriginal side of things, there's a couple of things. Firstly, to connect with country. For us, it means going back into nature and to slow things down. And so now for me, on a daily basis, I do that. For me, the water is a very healing place. So I do swim most days, and I do that for the ability to really slow the body down, to focus more on the breath, to practice gratitude. And then where I look from is, what is it that I can do to surround myself with people who are going to support me and to support what I'm up to, instead of thinking that I need to be independent? They're two very strong cultural attributes. Number one is our ability to, you know, get into earth and connect with earth, to connect with what's truly important, to listen to your heart and to listen to others, and to know that there is no separation between you and another human being, and that you're not alone. And even when you think you're alone, as an Aboriginal person, you're never alone. You know, we are one. There is no separation between me and another human being. That for me means that I'm able to really share about what's happening in my life authentically with others, and allow myself to see that it's not personal. To me, it is a function of being human. And when we do that, we get a greater amount of allowing others to contribute, and that gives us a much, much greater experience of life.
Well, there is not a lot of nature and harmony in the office environment. I guess it's much easier for you to just step out of the office when you need to. How can somebody learn to meditate in a very hectic time? We are heading up to Christmas, for example. There is lots of things that need to be ticked off before the season. So I'm wondering, is there anything you can teach us to be in harmony with nature while working in hectic environment?
Look, the good news is you don't need to be physically in nature to have it happen. So one of the things I'm certified in is the neuroscience of resilience, which looks at six different key areas of life that can help you create a truly meaningful connection with what we call your purpose, which you could say is to connect with your true self, to connect with your heart. And so you have a lot of options. You don't need to physically be out there. You can use a lot of guided visualization. I mean, thankfully for the internet, you know, and on YouTube, I think these days, if you Google or go into YouTube for anything around guided visualizations, there is plenty of recreation on bird sounds, for example, or water sounds, or breathing techniques. So you can do it from your own computer, say, for example. But according to the 6 different scientific background areas, there are a few things that I would highlight. One is visualization. Visualization is a very powerful way to transport yourself to wherever you want to be using the power of the brain. And I think that's one of the joys of being a human. Unlike any other creature on the planet, we have the ability in our mind's eye to actually transport and use our imagination to picture ourselves in a place. I do that all the time. So even when I'm with my children, you know, or I'm in my own home and I live in the city, I do imagine myself. I close down every morning and I transport myself into a place that brings me joy. And being around water when I can't be around water, I can imagine that. So firstly, I think anybody at any point in time through any time of the day, if you put breaks into your day, which I highly recommend. I know today a lot of people run back to meetings. Number one, I have a rule to never do that. So if in between meetings, I always recommend at least a 30-minute gap between meetings. And I specifically set aside 5 minutes either before a meeting as well as 5 minutes after a meeting to take a physical break, where I stop and actually then look at what I can do to connect myself with either a visualization practice or to go outside and get a breath of fresh air. So that's the simplest one.
What is the purpose of that physical break? Why do you need break between meetings?
So to be able to absorb and connect with what you actually were doing. So if we have something like 60,000 thoughts a day. If we keep running from one thing to another, that eventually is going to lead to burnout. If we don't stop and give ourselves the space to reflect on the lessons or what we took from that meeting, we find it very hard to actually apply successfully the outcomes of those meetings. I mean, we only need to look, one of the biggest complaints is that people are not producing the results that they're committed to producing. It's because they don't have the space to go back and then look back and reflect on, what did I take from that meeting? What do I need to schedule? What actions do I need to put in place? I mean, I constantly hear from leaders in particular saying, you know, I get to the end of the day and I feel like I've got no work done. Well, that's true. That's because you didn't really. I mean, you've been to a meeting, but when did you actually spend the time doing the thinking and the creative application of that? Hence why the breaks are really important.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I remember the time a couple of months ago, we were trying to get somebody new to the office, and I had interviews back to back because sometimes people wouldn't come. That really confused me at the end of the day, because I forgot completely. It came into one giant person that could do IT, could do SEO, could do some videos, definitely reflecting on what you learned and also compartmentalizing whatever learnings you took from that meeting is very important. We talked about the neuroscience and the key pointer, how to become a better leader. The first one was having a 30 minutes break. What is the next important step?
Your health again. See, as a leader, we do need to think about the decisions that we need. The second area that you can do it and you can practice meditation is while you eat. So I don't know, certainly for me, I know that I would just, sometimes I wouldn't even take a break for lunch. I would just work through lunch, you know, and so I wasn't really present. This is one of the things that we, certainly in our culture, we think that, you know, doing more is better, but actually it's not. It doesn't. The results speak for themselves. We are far more effective when we do not multitask and we are present. We make better decisions. We're more strategic and we're more present with the people that we're with. A health category in particular is really critical for this. So there are three different things. There's what you eat, the amount of movement you get, and then your sleep. My recommendation is don't do anything else while you're eating. Just allow yourself to concentrate on the meal and enjoy the food that you're eating. There's a big connection between the brain and the gut. And when you can actually just slow down the way you eat and be present to what you're putting into your body, you actually have got a greater chance of improving the gut biomes, which has a direct correlation to the quality of our thoughts. And then the quality of our thoughts influences the quality of our leadership. That's just one small example. Sleep, obviously, at night does improve your ability. You can do things at home, even if your day is completely chaos. What you do at home can make a massive difference.
So it's almost like a placebo effect, because you're focusing on health. But really, isn't it like organization chart, okay? Because now you're eating, so you have focus on how nutritious the food is. You're feeding, you know, vitamin C now with that lemon. It really helps us to bring our body into this zen that you're nurturing it and you're really loving it.
Absolutely.
It's like an office. It can't run without the maintenance guy looking into the different parts of the body.
That's absolutely right.
So you're basically not only leading your troops or your tribe, but also you can't forget about yourself as some part of that tribe. Focusing on it is vitally important. Tell us why.
I think ultimately as a leader, your intention is that you're able to support other people to be the best version of themselves. And why we do that is so that they can take the kind of actions that deliver the results that we are all committed to creating in the jobs that we do. If you're going to be able to do that to enable somebody else, you want to be able to be authentic in your ability to do it for yourself. So to be a leader starts with being able to lead yourself. And so it's the lessons that you get by being able to apply that in being able to do that actually has you more effective in your ability to do it for others. If you don't lead and don't have a commitment to having an impact on other human beings, then you probably don't care so much. But it starts with you. You know, it's the same analogy that people often will say about love. You know, if you really want to learn to love another human being, genuine and authentic love firstly has to then start with loving yourself. And it's the same with leadership.
We have to bring confidence into the mix to really make sure that we know what we are doing. And not have that little voice behind our head saying, you're not the right person here, you don't know what you're up to, and you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, and there might be another storm coming. We talked about the health, how important it is, how to have the 30 minutes gap between the meetings. What are the other things that we need to focus on to bring our excellency into the leadership?
One of the I've actually given this an acronym. It's a way to be the best version of yourself, and it's actually taken from a renowned psychotherapist who shortened the process of what it looks like to be congruent as a human being, to live and fulfill your best version of yourself. But the steps were about having a set of goals and taking actions and not having your thoughts distracted. See, at work, we often think that we need to get the acknowledgement or credit from somebody else. And in fact, one of the biggest complaints in the workplace is a lack of recognition or appreciation from others. But the real power of acknowledgement is the practice of gratitude. And so I have daily a practice of being there is that I'm grateful for. What do I acknowledge about what is working? What do I acknowledge about what isn't working? And when I do that, then I look from what is there that I can do to be grateful for what is, for the lesson that's available. So the practice of acknowledgement is really very powerful, actually.
Did you talk all about the A game?
So the acknowledgement is 1A in the A game. So I'll give you the steps. So the first A is about alignment. So our job as a leader is to show up, having integrity with what we say and what we do. And I think, we've all heard a lot about the big gap in corporates between, people say this, but then they don't do what they say. There's a big gap. So alignment is about how do you have what you say be a match for what you do and connect it with your true purpose. So firstly, it's about identifying then what is your vision and what is your purpose. You need to know that first of all. What are your values? The first A is all about the identification of those things and creating goals that are a match for your values. The second A is about action and identifying the kind of actions then that would actually forward that game. Now, in business, we call this strategic planning. When we sit down there and we say, oh, well, here's where I am today and here's where I want to be. And what are all the actions I need to take in order to get me from here to here? So the second part about action is really about identifying the kind of actions that are directly matched with your values, with your vision, with your purpose and with the mission. Now, in the workplace, we call it the brand. When you do that work for yourself as a leader, what is your vision as a leader and what are your values? And then when you look from an action point of view, say, well, what are the actions I would take that would align with my values and my vision? That's the second A. The third A is then acknowledgement. So now here you are, you've got your vision and you're taking the action. One of the things that has you very powerful in identifying and elevating the actions that you do take is the ability to stop after you take action and assess what you did that was working and to celebrate the accomplishment of what works, and then also look at what didn't work or what lessons you can learn so that you can apply something different as you go forward. Now, we call that acknowledgement. So the definition of acknowledgement is being able to recognize and tell the truth about what is present. So doing that gives you a space to be able to, do more of what works, right? Or you shift the dial a little bit, you identify what doesn't, and then you carve it out and you go again. So that's the third A. And then the final A is accountability. So when things don't go according to plan, what do? You got to stop and look at what could I do differently? What could have I done differently? Now, unfortunately, as a human being, we don't always do that. Often the pitfall is to think that it's to do with the external environment. Oh, I wasn't successful in getting that promotion. Well, that's got nothing to do with me. It's all because the company's cutting back in their costs or for whatever reason. So what tends to happen is we associate failure or breakdowns with what's happening in the world around us instead of what's happening over here where we are. So the last part of accountability really is looking from a place to go, okay, I have a say here about how things are going to go. What is the one thing that I can do that will have me take the kind of actions that's going to give me the results that I'm committed to taking? And when you take those 4 A's and you apply them to any area of life, that will have you play at your best, what we call the A game, to the best of your abilities to achieve what you say you want to achieve and carve out the life and the impact that you really want to have.
Well, it brings me to another great episode we had with Dr. Tracy Bauer, who talked about creating happiness, key shifts for great leadership. I recommend you this episode if you would like to learn how to focus on bringing happiness to the office. Now, Kylee, we know that taking to the roots, our parents knew how to celebrate successes. How would you elevate that success to bring the happiness and feel really fulfilled as a leader?
So I think there's a practice that I would recommend at the end of every day, and it's pretty simple, called 3 good things. We have a habit of getting to the end of the day and not really looking back at what we did. And so first of all, given that you have the ability to do it for yourself, rather than rely on what else is going to happen in the environment around you, at the end of every day, if you sit down and you just at least write down 3 good things. So basically what you're doing is you look back on your day and you say, what are 3 good things that happened today? Now, you might have had a really crappy day, and that's okay. It does not have to be something that is, out of this world, earth-shattering, The one good thing you could say is, I actually went to work today. I mean, when I was going through a really difficult time, that day when I was really struggling, there was times where I really even struggled to get outside the door. And I went, well, today I had a shower. That's a win. Or today I made my bed. That's a win, or today I ate breakfast, or I had a glass of water. I think we tend to think that sometimes we only need to acknowledge all these grandiose accomplishments, but that's the pitfall. See, when you just pay attention to the small things, like I woke up and I'm breathing. Oh, I made my bed. You're training your brain to instill gratitude and appreciation. So my first tip is to always start with yourself. Then what you want to do is you want to become somebody who does the acknowledgement of others. So if you're a leader, then I would be always, every time you're having a get together with your team, in fact, in any team meeting, you would always want to have a practice in your meetings by giving people the opportunity to share about accomplishments is one way to do it. But even when you're having coffee with a friend, you could make an effort to say, look, I really want to acknowledge you. There's something one of the things that I really love about you is you're always just so attentive in the way that you listen. I just really love that about you. See, we often don't say what's in our thoughts. We think it a lot about our friends. We think, oh, God, I really love that person. How often have you ever sat there? And I'll be sitting at home sometimes and I'll just think of a friend of mine for a particular reason. And then we don't take the action. This is why the A's are so important. If you ever thought of how much you appreciate somebody, pick up the phone and call them. It is incredible what it does to you and what it does to them when it brings up dopamine and the experience of accomplishment in yourself.
Absolutely. Accomplish happiness around you by sending that text message why you appreciate somebody, why they are important in your life, why you are thinking about them. Because even having good thoughts about somebody can bring happiness to your tribe.
Can I give one question I recommend asking? See, often people don't know how to do it. They get stuck on, well, what would I say, or I don't know how to. So my advice always is sometimes, and this is sometimes the bad news of the good news, mostly people are really fixated on what's happening in their own life, that they don't ask the other person about their own life. So my biggest tip is to actually ask somebody, what do you want to be acknowledged for? You don't need to have the answer. People are walking around this world feeling unappreciated. I mean, if you went out for the next 7 days and said to every person you meet or in your team, hey, can I just talk to you for 5 minutes? What do you want to be acknowledged for? I think if we take that one statement and use that in every conversation we have with everyone, hey, let me just find out, what do you want to be acknowledged for?
Happiness starts with daily dose of positivity hugs delivered, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I wanted to ask you about the power of storytelling to transform reality, create a movement, and achieve breakthrough results in business. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, I'm going to use a very easy to understand one story that we will all know well. Well, I'm assuming we'll all know well, but, you take the likes of Gandhi, for example, or Martin Luther King is probably one of the ones that stands out for me. Gandhi created a movement, to have the British leave India. That started with a conversation. And it wasn't through power and influence. It was really through his commitment to actually speak his commitment and how to not fight with war, but to actually go peacefully. But the other one that I think at the moment, I noticed there's actually some documentaries out at the moment about Martin Luther King's story and how he stood for ending slavery in the United States. And it was the same thing. This man literally had a vision. And so when we talk about storytelling that transforms reality, what we're talking about is being able to communicate about a vision that you have for a brighter future. And when you can share that story, much like what Martin Luther King did, you know, he gathered people around and said, I'm a stand for having, you know, ending slavery. And people really connected with that vision. We want freedom. And so that there was a big, you know, you just go onto YouTube and you'll see, you know, the talks that he gave on the steps of Washington. That was storytelling at its finest. People could envision what he stood for. And what it meant was people put their attention on the future instead of having their attention on all the chaos and the problems and the fighting. The power of storytelling is when you can create a story that focuses people on an inspired new future, it interrupts the story or the narrative and the complaints and the gossiping and all the drama that goes on. So suddenly people's reality is altered because their focus and their attention is on creating an inspired new future. So in business, when you do that, as a leader, that's your job. Your job is to have people focused on the vision and telling the story of the vision. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is people can often get stuck on complaining about what's not working instead of anchoring on the vision itself.
Anchoring on the vision itself, and thank you so much for bringing that Indigenous truth to our tables tonight. I wanted to ask you about the book that you recommend everybody reads, because that was an aha moment for you.
I'm a big book lover, so I have so many different books. It's so hard for me to choose, you know. In fact, I'm in the process of writing a book, so I think the book that I wish I had isn't written yet. I'm about to write it. But there is a book that I use as what I would call my go-to Bible as a leader. And I do it because it's got some very, very practical, groundbreaking methodologies in it for how to be effective in certainly having people align with creating a movement and also disrupting the traditional patterns of thoughts that we have. And it's called The 3 Laws of Performance. It's written by Steve Zaffron and David Logan. It is a book that's grounded in actual case studies of work that's been done with companies all over the world, not just big brands, but in communities that have transformed communities in like Africa. And so it's very practical. I pull it out all the time, even as a coach and an expert, because I use it like that. But it's also got some guiding principles in the back of it. And one of my favorites, which I still use every single day, is the simple practice of noticing when you're being in life as a player or whether you're in life as a spectator. And you're either one or the other. You can't be both at the same time. So when you're a player, you're in action and you're playing the game of leadership. You know, you're forwarding the vision, you're in flow. But you'll notice when you watch a game of sport, it's the same. If you're a spectator and you're on the sidelines, what you're doing is judging and assessing the people that are playing the game. So that principle in and of itself, I personally had a massive transformation because it had me start to look at, oh my goodness, I am in either one of 2 modes. I'm either playing and I'm actively playing, and when I'm not playing, I'm judging myself about whether I'm doing a good job or not doing a good job. Oh, that's right. I just got to get out of the stands. I just got to get back on the court and play the game. So definitely a great book.
Definitely a great book before the great book of Kylee's coming. So when is the launch planned?
It's a 12-month incubation. I've got a big program this year that has started it started halfway through this year for the emerging leaders. It's one of those things that as a woman and as a mother, you have to prioritize what you give your time to. And because I'm still committed to having integrity and being authentic in my life, I'm not about to throw 100 hours in a week to make it happen. And I'm also not the person who's going to have some ghost ghostwriter write my books. I'm giving myself a year. I've had all the trimmings and a lot of stuff go into it from the design of the Emerging Leaders program. And this stage is very likely to be called something like Emerging, but I'm giving myself another year. So this time next year should be on the writing on the wall.
Excellent. That means there will be another Kylee episode, I hope. Anyway, let's go to Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Women are like tea bags. We don't know our true strength until we are in hot water." In life, how are you in hot water? How are you brewing?
I feel like I'm in hot water every day. I don't think there's not a moment where I'm not in hot water. I mean, look, I suppose for any woman who knows who's got teenage children, it is crazy all the time. So I wake up in the morning, hence why I really have to be very strict with my daily rituals in the morning. Look, sadly for me at the moment too, I'm also going through a separation and a divorce, and I've made a big commitment to ensure that that relationship is thriving and full of joy and happiness. And, you know, that's not always easy. You know, we still live together and we still co-parent and all of that. Just certain things that had me make that decision. And as while I'm trying to navigate that decision plus run the business and have the children, it's like there is not a day where I think, oh, stop, I need to stop. A bit like what you're saying here, the hot water is like, okay, notice that you're in hot water now. What do you need to do to recalibrate? How do you need to pause and breathe? And I did the same thing this morning. And then I had to really acknowledge, you know, sometimes as a human being, when we're going through big changes in life, it is really the impact of those changes on our brain, on our body, happen without us even knowing it. So I just noticed I felt like that when I woke up this morning. So thought this morning I went and had a very quiet cup of coffee out the back, gave myself 10 minutes just to kind of breathe before I got stuck into my day. But just that 10 minutes was enough for me to give myself some compassion and remind myself that I am dealing with a lot. And I'm going through a lot, and I'm not always going to be conscious of the impact of that. And I just really need to grant myself some compassion.
If you had a chance to go anywhere in the world and have a private breakfast with anybody in the world, who would you go with and where would you go to?
I would have breakfast with Oprah. If I had to go anywhere in the world, I would do it with her at her home. But if I could choose, I would have her at my own home. Because then I could share the experience with my family. I think it would be a remarkable thing to, and because it would be private, you know, I think if you're going to have breakfast with Oprah and you're in public, then I just like to have it to myself. So I would do it at home where I could, you know, enjoy it and also have my children learn from somebody who, you know, has had a remarkable contribution in the world. You know, she's had obviously a lot of her, you know, her own story and journey in itself, but the lessons that she's learned, the people that she's interviewed, I could not help but want to learn from the wisdom that she's embraced with all of that.
Absolutely. We love Oprah. She's been quoted a couple of times, but so now it's time to quote Brené Brown. Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and embracing who we are. And that's a great leadership quote as well. Thank you very much, Racy, from our team, to bring that to our attention. Kylee, it's been a pleasure, and it's so smart to bring Oprah to your home. I didn't think about that, because you can definitely make the best out of it rather than having a meeting in her home with a production crew and lots of office and lots of noise that you don't need when you have such a brain at your table. Thank you very much for staying with us tonight to bring that positivity, quotation, and great lessons to our leaders. Because after all, if you want to become a leader, don't ask others for permission. You need to develop that strategy and make sure that you do it every single day. And that's it from episode 123 of the PhD livestream. Thanks to our guest, Kylee Stone. To stay updated and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered, follow Woman on IT and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. We are going to recuperate and enjoy our mindfulness moment over this Christmas period. So that's the last episode to this year. I hope you can check our previous episodes to really gain more knowledge, more insights from the leaders all around the world. And we just had great leader from the Wakka. And Kulluli, there you go. It's not Wakka like in the song of Shakira, so don't get confused here. Definitely not that part of the world. Have a Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, wherever in the world you are, whatever you are celebrating. And as always, our positivity quote comes from Positive Thinking Only on Goals. Look for something positive in each day, even if some days you have to look a little harder. And finally, as Maya Angelou says, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. And that goes beyond the leadership style. Today is your day to hack the future, hack the positivity you want. Thank you.